On May 11, 1960, an auto worker who went by the name Ricardo Klement stepped off the bus after his shift at a Mercedes-Benz automotive plant in Buenos Aires, Argentina. As he was walking home, he was abducted by several men and thrown into a vehicle. This was no ordinary kidnapping, however. There was no demand for ransom. And that was because this was no ordinary auto worker. This was actually Adolf Eichmann, one of the masterminds behind the Holocaust. Eichmann wasn't the only member of the German Nazi Party to have found his way to South America. In fact, he was one of thousands. Learn more about the Nazis who fled to South America after World War II and how they managed to escape on this episode of Everything Everywhere Daily. This episode is sponsored by ButcherBox. Summer is right around the corner, and that means cookouts. No matter what your preferred food is for a cookout or a barbecue, ButcherBox can help you make it the best. If you want to serve up some hamburgers, ButcherBox has grass-fed ground beef to make the perfect smash burger. Want to cook up some steaks? Well, ButcherBox has that too, with some of the best cuts of steak such as New York strip, ribeye, and filet mignon. Do you like grilled chicken? Well, ButcherBox has some of the best pasture-raised chicken that you will find anywhere. And if you really want to wow people at your next cookout, you can try grilling some of their wild-caught salmon on a cedar plank. Sign up at butcherbox.com/daily and get a special deal. ButcherBox is offering my listeners a free-for-a-year offer plus an additional $20 off. You can choose salmon, chicken breasts, or steak tips free in every order for a year. Sign up today at butcherbox.com/daily and use code DAILY to choose your free-for-a-year offer, plus get $20 off your first order. Hey everyone, this is Gary. If you're listening to this podcast, you clearly are someone who likes to learn every day. And if you want to add a little more learning into your everyday routine, check out TED Talks Daily, the podcast that brings you a new TED Talk every weekday. In less than 15 minutes a day, you'll hear about some of the big ideas shaping our world. This includes everything from artificial intelligence to the search for dark matter and more. Listen to TED Talks Daily wherever you get your podcasts. At the conclusion of the war in Europe in May of 1945, many members of the Nazi Party and of the German government knew that they would be in big trouble if they were captured by the Allies. High-ranking Nazi officials had been captured, and many of them were to be put on trial for war crimes at the Nuremberg trials. Hermann Göring, for example, was captured, put on trial, and committed suicide before he could be executed. Heinrich Himmler tried to escape, was captured by the British, and also killed himself. And these were two of the very highest-ranking Nazis, but there were thousands more lower-level officers in the SS and Gestapo who committed countless crimes over the course of the Third Reich. They knew that their options were either to be captured, which meant execution or imprisonment, possibly life imprisonment, or escape. Staying in Germany was not a good option because it probably would have only been a matter of time before they were discovered. They would eventually have to provide documentation for jobs or ID cards leading to their discovery. Thousands of Nazis went into hiding in an attempt to flee somewhere where they could be safe. In the months after the end of the war, an underground movement of former Nazis began to develop escape routes to countries mostly outside of Europe. These escape routes became known as rat lines. The term rat line doesn't come from the fact that the Nazis were rats, although they were. Rather, it was a nautical term used to describe rope ladders used to climb up masts to access sails. There were multiple rat lines used by the Nazis, and they received help from many different sources, some wittingly and others unwittingly. There were multiple ways that former Nazis escaped, but there were two primary routes they took to escape Europe. The first route involved going through Spain. Spain wasn't party to the Second World War, but it also wasn't totally neutral. They were very sympathetic to the Axis powers, as the leader of Spain, Francisco Franco, had been supported by fascist parties in both Italy and Germany. In Spain, fleeing Nazis may not have been actively supported, but they also wouldn't have been actively hunted down. The other rat line went through Italy. Nazis would find their way to Rome and then from there go to the port city of Genoa. In the chaos of Europe after the war, there was enough confusion to allow the Nazis to take advantages of services offered by the Allies, the Catholic Church, and the Red Cross. The Catholic Church had a system in place to settle Catholic refugees during the war, which was co-opted. The International Committee of the Red Cross also offered passports to displaced persons. In theory, the displaced persons' passports were issued after an investigation, but during this period after the war, the standards were very lax. This allowed Nazis to travel under assumed names and to escape attention. In addition to exploiting these programs designed for legitimate refugees, they were also aided by those who were true believers and Nazi sympathizers. An Austrian Catholic bishop named Alois Hudal lived in Rome and actively supported Nazis trying to escape Europe. Likewise, there was a small group of Franciscan monks in Croatia led by an ultra-nationalist priest by the name of Father Krunoslav Draganovich who ran a rat line. There's no evidence that there was any knowledge of this at the highest levels of the Vatican or that anyone approved it. Likewise, there's no indication that the Red Cross knew how its programs were being exploited. Some other rat lines went through Finland. The Finns had some sympathies for Germany because they had a common enemy in the Soviet Union. The Nazis who got to Finland could then go to neutral Sweden and from Sweden to other countries. And along the way, there were also officials who were simply corrupt and would help or look the other way for money. Countries such as Spain, Italy, and Finland were not the final destination for these fleeing Nazis. Overwhelmingly, most Nazi officials attempted to flee to South America. Why South America? Several reasons made South America an attractive destination. The first is that every South American country was formally neutral during the majority of World War II. Second, many countries had significant populations of German immigrants, which would allow them to blend in, and some members of that community were even Nazi sympathizers. However, there was one country that was particularly attractive to Nazis on the run: Argentina. Argentina had a particularly large German population. Although neutral during the war, they ended up joining the Allies in March of 1945, less than 2 months before the war in Europe ended, due to pressure by the Americans. However, in 1946, a new president came to power in Argentina, Juan Perón. Perón had been sent to Italy as a diplomat in 1938, where he became enamored by the fascist party that ruled the country. Even before Perón came to power, Argentina was seen as a destination for Germans fleeing the war. 2 cases in particular proved this point. When Admiral Karl Donitz ordered all German submarines to stand down on May 5, 1945, 2 submarines refused to obey the order. U-boat 977 and U-boat 530 completely and independently of each other decided to sail to Argentina. U-boat 530 arrived on July 10th and U-boat 977 arrived on August 17th. With Perón in power, he began to actively help former Nazis escape and set up a new life in Argentina. Perón actually publicly denounced the Nuremberg trials. He commanded Argentinian embassies to issue visas and travel documents to Nazis that wished to come to Argentina. When Nazis arrived in Argentina, they were often given cover and sometimes money to establish a new life. Argentina accepted the largest number of Nazis, but there were also significant numbers that fled to Chile, Brazil, and Paraguay, with smaller numbers in other Latin American countries as well. It isn't known exactly how many former Nazis fled to South America because no records were kept and most of them were never discovered. Some of the best estimates put the number of Nazis who found sanctuary in South America at 10,000. At least half of that number, and perhaps more, settled in Argentina. The primary exodus of Nazis took place between 1945 and 1950. While most of the Nazis who fled to South America were never arrested or even uncovered, several of the highest-ranking officials in the Third Reich were pursued for years after the war. The best-known Nazi fugitive was Adolf Eichmann. Eichmann was the architect of the final solution. He was considered to be the world's most wanted Nazi. He arrived in Argentina using a falsified Red Cross passport, which he used to board a steamship from Genoa in 1950. He used the alias Ricardo Klement, lived outside of Buenos Aires with his wife and 4 children, and worked at a Mercedes-Benz factory. He was abducted by agents of the Israeli Mossad in 1960, smuggled out of the country dressed as an El Al flight crew member, and taken to Israel. There he faced a public trial and was executed minutes after midnight on June 1st, 1962. The manhunt, abduction, and trial of Adolf Eichmann will be the subject of a future episode. Dr. Joseph Mengele was probably the most wanted Nazi after Eichmann. Mengele conducted medical experiments at concentration camps on twins, pregnant women, and disabled people. He literally tortured people to death in the process of conducting his macabre experiments. Mengele arrived in Argentina in 1949, married in Uruguay under his own name, and returned to Argentina to live in a suburb of Buenos Aires. The government of West Germany asked Argentina to extradite him, but they never granted the request. After the arrest of Adolf Eichmann, Mengele spent the rest of his life in hiding, moving between Paraguay and Brazil. He died while suffering a stroke while swimming in 1979. His remains were positively identified in 1985. Walter Rauff was a colonel in the SS who implemented the mobile gas chambers that were responsible for killing over 100,000 people. He was actually captured by the Americans after the war, but he escaped. He made it to Ecuador in 1949 and then moved to Chile, where he openly lived under his own name. His whereabouts became known because he literally sent a letter to the West German government with his new address so his pension could be forwarded. He was arrested in 1962, but the Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet refused to extradite him to West Germany. He was never put on trial and died naturally in 1984. These are just some of the more high-profile cases. However, there were many more Nazis who were known to live in South America. Klaus Barbie, the Butcher of Leon, lived in Bolivia. Franz Stangl, known as the White Death, ran the Nazi euthanasia program. He was arrested in Brazil and put on trial in West Germany for the murder of 900,000 people. Joseph Schwamberger was the commandant of 3 labor camps and organized the execution of hundreds of people, personally killing at least 35 with his own hands. He became a citizen of Argentina and ended up standing trial in West Germany in 1990, where he died in prison in 2004. In 2015, researchers from the University of Buenos Aires found the ruins of a building built during the war that had German coins from the period as well as other Nazi artifacts. The building was located in the rainforests of northeast Argentina, very close to the border of Paraguay. The theory is that the building was constructed during the war in the event that Nazi leaders had to flee the country, but it was never used. There's one more thing that many of you might be thinking at this point. Given all the high-ranking Nazis who fled to South America, what about the rumors that Hitler himself may have made it to South America? Rumors have swirled for decades about the possibility that Adolf Hitler may have survived the war and lived out the rest of his days in hiding somewhere in South America. The death of Hitler and the rumors surrounding his survival are worthy of its own episode. Suffice it to say that one of the reasons why the rumors persisted was because of the lack of evidence of the death of Hitler that was provided by the Soviets. Even the Americans issued memorandums during the occupation of Berlin regarding the whereabouts of the body of Hitler. The true stories of German U-boats that traveled all the way to Argentina only fueled the stories of Hitler surviving the war. There were many accounts of people who claimed to have seen someone who looked vaguely Hitler-esque over the years, but there has never been any hard evidence that Hitler actually survived the war or ever even made it out of his bunker in Berlin. The escape of Nazi war criminals to South America was facilitated by a combination of organized networks, sympathetic and corrupt officials, as well as exploiting legitimate services designed for refugees. This allowed many high-ranking Nazis to evade justice for years, with even more having never been brought to justice at all. The executive producer of Everything Everywhere Daily is Charles Daniel. The associate producers are Benji Long and Cameron Kiever. I want to give a big shout out to everyone who supports the show over on Patreon, including the show's producers. Your support helps me put out a show every single day. And also, Patreon is currently the only place where Everything Everywhere Daily merchandise is available to the top tier of supporters. If you'd like to talk to other listeners of the show and members of the Completionist Club, you can join the Everything Everywhere Daily Facebook group or Discord server. Links to everything are in the show notes.